Well, here we go again. This is our 10th week together, and we started out dealing with the question, what is the church? And then we dealt with our journey of faith in terms of what's our response to the world as the church and as individuals, and some different routes we take in that. But I decided for the month of July that we might look in the mirror a little bit and just converse together and think together about what is the United Methodist Church. And when I posed that question to myself, a person's name cropped up, and it's only meaningful to my generation possibly because he died in a plane crash in 1961, and I'm referring to Dag Hammarskjold. And he was the General Secretary of the United Nations. And I was reading a book recently that said that of all the untimely deaths in the 20th century, the death of Dag Hammarskjold was probably the most significant in terms of the history of our world, because as the second term in the General Secretary of the United Nations, he was really starting to have an impact in terms of how the nations dealt with each other through the United Nations. Well, after his death, a book was published, and the title of the book is Markings, and it's the paragraphs and sentences that he jotted down on pieces of paper, and then persons put it together and edited it. And there's two of those that have always been really important for me in my journey of life. And one of them is genius is simplicity. I just love it. You know, if it can't be made into simple terms, you need to work harder, because genius is simplicity. But the other one is what we're going to deal with this morning, and that is maturity is identity. Maturity is identity. And that simply means that to be mature, to act in mature ways in relationship with each other, the key to that is being mature as individuals or as entities like the church. And so immediately, what in the world is maturity? Well, there's 101 definitions, but just let you know where I'm coming from. I experience maturity to be before making a decision, you consider the consequences. And after you've made a decision, you accept responsibility for the decisions you've made. So to me, that is in a nutshell what I mean by maturity. And so for the church, the only possible way for the church to be mature, sometimes we're not, is if our identity is clear. And when our identity is ambiguous, consequences are unpredictable, they're confusing, you're going every which way. But on the other hand, when identity is clear, the consequences are defined, and the ability to respond, and that's what responsibility is. The ability to respond is accepted. So, what is the identity of the United Methodist Church? Well, I learned a long time ago an axiom that I've tried to follow, and that is, Blake, if a point takes more than 25 words to express, it will seldom be made. And so I fiddled around and tried to come up with a 25-word identity of the United Methodist Church. So here it is, and that the United Methodist Church is a global church which delegates authority, personalizes faith, and sends disciples of Jesus to transform the world with God's love. Now, this Sunday and the next 3 Sundays, we're going to unpack today the global church, the next week delegating authority. That sounds boring, but it's really fun. Personalizing faith, which is very significant. And then what does it look like to send disciples of Jesus into the world to transform the world with God's love will be our final section of the 4. Now, what this really means is that as a consequence of this identity, the United Methodist Church is not a reflection of any nation or culture. Secondly, it does not centralize authority. Thirdly, it does not depersonalize faith with doctrine. And finally, it's not satisfied just to be a gathering of like-minded believers. So that's sort of a summary of where we're going to be in July. And if you've got that down pat, you don't have to listen anymore and enjoy the day. But then we're going to begin today with the global church. Let's just start with what in the Gospel of John is termed as the heart of the gospel, John 3:16. It reads, God so loved the world. And we know the rest of the story. It does not say God loves a certain section of the world. It does not say that God loved the Near East or the Far East or the West. It doesn't say God so loved the United States or Israel or China, Portugal, or Venezuela. No, it says clearly, God so loved the world. And this simply means in 2020 that the United Methodist Church is not tied or a reflection of any nation or any culture. Human beings have created a lot of tensions, a lot of territories, and a lot of divisions. But those territories and divisions are not created by the God of love. No, God so loved the world. And that's a very distinctive position for the United Methodist Church to be in. Let's look at our Protestant community, our brothers and sisters in other denominations. We have the Presbyterian Church USA. We have the Lutheran Church of America. Most denominations are tied to national identity. Indeed, somebody would say, well, now, what about the Episcopal Church? Well, the Episcopal Church only exists in the United States. There's an Anglican communion throughout the world made up of the descendants of the Church of England throughout the world. But the Episcopal Church is USA. And then we look at the Roman Catholic Church, probably our partner as a global church. But even the Roman Catholic Church has an American Conference of United States bishops that can speak to issues within the United States independently from the bishops from the rest of the world. But we don't have that. We're a global church, and the Council of Bishops is made up of bishops throughout the world, and there's no subsection of the Council of Bishops that can separate themselves in order to act independently. So it's really in our organization, in our vision of what we're about, that every decision we make must be made through the lens of John 3:16. God so loved the world. Now, quite frankly, that's a dilemma. Some people have been a little bit stronger than that and called it our curse. Because when you look at the issues of immigration, race, human sexuality, the United Methodist Church often struggles to be relevant to indigenous settings. That's our curse, if you will. That's our dilemma. But it is our identity, and we live with that dilemma. One of the illustrations I oftentimes think of in terms of this dilemma is when a few years ago we were talking at General Conference about the issue of immigration, and it started out to be a United States discussion. And then all of a sudden, a person from Mozambique stood up and said, "No, wait just a minute. We don't quite grasp what you're talking about in terms of your issues, because he said, within the last 6 months, we've had 10,000 people starved at our borders, welcomed to our land because we had food." All of a sudden, the discussion changed. Why? Because we're a global church. So we've got the curse, we've got the dilemma, but on the other hand, there's some blessings that come along with that. So let's look at that for a minute. I guess the best way to look at that blessing is the way we can share our resources. Some of you have heard my story of being in Angola and talking to the Minister of Culture, and he had tears in his eyes as he shared with me. I've never had the person happened to be a Muslim, and he said, "I've never had the opportunity to say this to a United Methodist bishop outside of our own here in Angola." And he started crying. He said, "I've just got to thank you." And I said, "Tell me about your tears." And he said, "Every hospital and every school that we have inherited in Angola was started by Methodist missionaries." He said, "You came to save lives and save souls. The other churches came to save souls." That's a sharing of resources. That's a sharing of vision. Only happen if we're a global church. What about Africa University? The first 4-year degree granting university on the continent of Africa. Nations started universities, but nations changed regimes, and all of a sudden a university that got started by one regime wouldn't get supported by the next regime. Africa University stood alone when it was created as the first private university in Africa, not vulnerable to the changing of political parties or regimes. But deeper than just those two illustrations is that being a global church, we have a built-in avoidance to civil religion. Civil religion is when the civil and the ecclesiastical, where the church and the civil become one, and you really can't tell them apart. We have a built-in avoidance of that, and we all have a tendency sometimes to get into civil religion because we want to think our nation is special and our nation is one of privilege. But in the United Methodist Church, we avoid that immediately and say, no. We are not a church that reflects a particular nation or a particular culture. Now, the history has been recently that this globality is really being put to the test. Now, the current protocol that was adopted by agreement of all conflicted parties in the denomination a year ago, that agreement, that protocol that is being practiced and upheld by all of our leaders is yet to be confirmed by General Conference, but it is in practice. It's proposed for the future. Most say it is likely to be adopted, and one of the central tenets of moving forward will be that the global nature of our denomination is maintained. It'll be providing for local and cultural relevance, and that's been our identity for 250 years. But in our recent history, we took an opinion, we took a resolution, made it into law. And when we did that, all of a sudden, the global nature of the church became very, very ambiguous, because a resolution concerning a social issue could not be applied effectively throughout the world. So it's a curse, it's a blessing. Recently it's become ambiguous, but going forward, if the protocol is accepted, it will be as clear as it's ever been that God so loved the world. And as a part of God's church, the United Methodist Church will continue to be global in nature, with some dilemmas, but with some blessings, but we believe according to the will of God's love. To think about this, I'd like to pose the first question would be, put yourself as a member of General Conference. You have one vote. There's 800 and some odd votes at General Conference. What would your vote be on a single issue if you had the opportunity to terminate the global identity of the United Methodist Church and become part of the United Methodist Church in the United States? What would your decision be? That's the question before the United Methodist Church today. Another question is, how does being a part of a global church enhance or prohibit your own journey of faith in God's love? Does it trip you up, or does it enable you to be even stronger and more confident in your faith? And then finally, what in your opinion is the hard work in being global in your beliefs and in your identity? And as Grace United Methodist Church, we're those that have experienced God's love. What's the hard work in being global in Winfield, in our neighborhood today? Thanks for listening.